After watching hundreds of reps of the new Washington Commanders linebackers, I can firmly tell you that Frankie Luvu is the closest thing you're going to get to Micah Parsons this year from the Commanders. That is not all that I found. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. And from there, you will get text messages from me. Send text messages to me. We're talking about news analysis, having one-on-one conversations about everything going on involving the Washington Commanders. No hashtags, no apps, and you'll get bonus content. We've got, I would say, mostly weekly, right? Insiders, you guys know this, but not every single weekend, unfortunately, but mostly weekly insider exclusive mailbag episodes. We call them command huddles that we're dropping. And we've also started our film study sessions where I can share film with you privately that I cannot share on the air here on Locked On Commanders. So lots of stuff going on over there. Again, joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. Send me a text today. I'm David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, everydayers, I thank you for your continued support. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started today. On today's episode, we're going to update the Washington Commanders salary cap situation. They are under $50 million left in cap space, which sounds like a fairly low number when you're talking about a team that started in the 90s, but still plenty of cap space to go around. But we will talk about that situation and we'll update contracts. But first, we got to take a look at these new linebackers the Washington Commanders have brought in. We've already looked at the new cornerbacks. Now we're moving on and talking about the linebacker group. And we got three guys to study: Frankie Luvu, Bobby Wagner, and we got Anthony Pittman. And look, when Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. first got hired, the question that we all asked was, who's going to be the Micah Parsons, right? Who's going to be the versatile electric pass rusher that this defense really highlights and really gets going? And at the time, we didn't have a whole lot of options. So I kind of looked at Jamin Davis, like, his pass rush grades are better. His pass rush ability and moves are better than his coverage ability. So maybe this team can get into a situation where they use Jamin Davis. Dan Quinn even talked about Jamin and how much he studied his pass rushing ability leading up to the NFL scouting combine. And if the current signings are a sign of what they think about Jamin Davis, I don't know that Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn came away too impressed with what Jamin does as a pass rusher either, because they went out and they signed Frankie Luvu, who to me, guys, looks like your Micah Parsons again. And I want to make this very, very clear. I'm not telling you that Frankie's going to be an all-pro. He's going to be an immediate Pro Bowler. I don't want to get too crazy, but just when you look at the style of defense, if you're looking for that guy that the Washington Commanders defense under Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn are going to use as a chess piece, move around to many different places, and use as an electric pass rusher to try to disrupt the quarterback, I think Frankie Luvu is the guy that you look at right now and say he's probably the dude they're trying to do that with. In 2023, Frankie had 104 pass rushing snaps, according to PFF, 11th most among all NFL linebackers, and he had a 90.1 pass rushing grade, which was tops in the league. The Washington Commanders signed him to a 3-year deal, $31 million total, $19.13 million guaranteed, with an $11.5 million signing bonus. He counts for $3.87 million against the salary cap this year, because they also tacked on 2 void years. And I don't want to do a complete refresher of our void year conversations in the past, but just for those who need a refresher, 2 void years. So you got a 3-year contract, 2 void years, leads up to 5 years. What the Washington Commanders now do is they can take that $11.5 million signing bonus, and instead of dividing that up in 3 years of salary cap implications, you actually divide that up into the 5-year salary cap implications. At the end of that 3rd year, if Frankie Luvu does not re-sign, there's a certain deadline that he'll have to re-sign by. If he does not re-sign, those 2 void years, they combine, they collect, and they become dead cap. But that's 2026's problem. 2026, yeah, 2026 is a problem, not 2024. He turns 28 in September, so by the time his contract is up, he'll be in his 30s. PFF credited him with just 7 sacks in 2023. I say just 7 sacks, but for an off-ball linebacker, that's not too shabby. In fact, is number 2 overall. 20 total pressures, which was 12th overall, and a pass rush win rate of 19%, which was 5th best among all NFL linebackers that had at least 50 pass rushes. So very, very good pass rushing resume from Frankie Luvu. In coverage, he also covered 422 times according to PFF. That's 37th most. So a guy that the Carolina Panthers certainly used in coverage, certainly used as a pass rusher as well. Ended up with a 67.7 PFF grade there. Not great, but number 18 among linebackers that had at least 400 or more pass coverage snaps, which there was 42 of them. So we're not exactly talking about a small group of linebackers here. So, you like that he's in that upper echelon, the upper half of that group as well. No penalties in coverage, which is good, called or accepted. 2 touchdowns allowed on 51 targets. So again, not great, right? But certainly some solid numbers from Frankie Luvu. So you expect to see kind of an all around solid linebacker that the Washington Commanders are bringing in from the Carolina Panthers. So turn it on the tape. And again, insiders, you have the tape study. I again, went through hundreds and hundreds of Frankie Luvu reps. The tape study that I sent you does not have all the hundreds and hundreds of reps because I wouldn't do that to you. You got about 15 minutes of Frankie Luvu to watch, which is very entertaining and hopefully in and of its own keeps your attention. But I watched 3 games. I watched week 2, Carolina Panthers against the New Orleans Saints, week 12 at the Tennessee Titans, week 13 at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And what is interesting here is, look, all these teams are a little bit different now, right? And they will be a little bit different when the Washington Commanders see them in 2024. But the New Orleans Saints, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, both on the schedule for the Washington Commanders to face in 2024. So these are opponents that Frankie Luvu knows well from being in the NFC South, and opponents that I got to watch him play against here in this tape study. And from what I was able to take away from the tape is he's got very good spatial awareness. This is a guy who understands that defense is not linear. Defense is spatial, right? You're talking about area defense, and especially in zone coverage, everybody knows zone coverage, you got a little bit of a bubble around you, and you're kind of responsible for everything in that bubble. And there are several plays that we identified there in the tape study that you see Frankie Luvu use very good spatial awareness to make sure that, sometimes he's got two receivers in his area and he's covering them basically as best as you possibly can for one guy. Continuous effort, high motor. He's a guy who his feet never stop moving. He's never stopped looking for work. This is not a guy you're going to see standing around on the field very often, just kind of looking lost in space and not knowing what to do. Rushes with a purpose. When he does pass rush, he does it on purpose. And I say that, and a lot of people kind of take that for granted. I think maybe say that, well, of course he pass rushes, with a purpose. Why wouldn't you? That's first of all, it's a very fun part of the game. Second of all, it's your job. But I think, Commanders fans, you might be unfortunately a little bit too familiar with pass rushers who don't necessarily always do it with a type of intensity or a type of purpose that you would like to see in a pass rusher, especially one that's quote unquote supposed to be one of the best in the league. And run defense, this is where his size does show up a little bit, can get a little bit washed out in the mess, in the mud with the blockers moving and everything else going on. But he is patient. He's very smart. Again, spatial awareness shows up in run defense as well. Gets vertical to the line of scrimmage, doesn't bite too hard on what the offense is trying to show him. Instead, he's very, very adept, very smart when he's reading the offensive directions and what they're trying to do. And when he has a shot to take it, he does shoot that shot and does it pretty well with success. Not an imposing physical figure, not a guy who's going to bowl over somebody simply with just brute force, but speed to power is certainly there. There's one sack rep that is on the film study that you guys will see is speed to power. I mean, he takes a right guard who's got about, close to 100 pounds on him, I think, and just completely bowls him over. So not afraid to mix it up. He's got a little bit of a size deficiency when he gets into the trenches and all that stuff, but he certainly is not afraid to throw what weight he does have around. And certainly, again, a fun tape study. I think he's going to be a fun guy for Washington Commanders fans to watch. But what about the veteran? What about the leader? What about the guy that you expect to have a captain's patch on his shoulder? Bobby Wagner. He's coming up next. I'll tell you what I saw when I turned on the Bobby Wagner tape. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament starting on Thursday. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed to go all the way, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who you think is going to win it all Selection Sunday has come and gone. The UConn men are currently plus 370 favorites in the men's bracket, and the South Carolina women are minus 145 favorites to win it all on that side. Of course, not all football fans are basketball fans, so if you're looking forward to the start of a new NFL season and Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans, Louisiana, the 49ers are still plus 500 favorites. The Chiefs are still plus 650 second favorites. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets, or anything else that you want to. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NFL. Continuing now with today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Every dayers, make sure you come back tomorrow. We're going to have another position group of free agents that we're looking at, and we're going to pre-stack the depth chart. We're going to look at some draft options and look at all the good stuff that comes with a linebacker position group. With a position group today, look at the linebacker position group. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your television all day long? Do you have to turn down the volume when they start yelling and shouting about mostly nonsense? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Moving on now in our linebacker free agent study to Bobby Wagner, the veteran, the leader of this group. You expect a leader, if not the leader, in the locker room. We'll see what other players who are still around think about that. But 1 year, $6.5 million for Bobby Wagner, $6.06 million guaranteed, a $2 million signing bonus, $6.5 million cap hit for Bobby. So it is a 1 year deal. So it kind of shows you, just the stats. Bobby, I think he's a 1 year to 1 year type of guy. Maybe he returns to Seattle next year. Maybe he comes back to Washington. Maybe he retires. Maybe he goes somewhere else. But he does turn 34 in June. So certainly, the end of the road for Bobby is coming up, at some point in time. 81 pass rush snaps for Bobby Wagner in 2023. It's 23rd among linebackers, but not a whole heck of a lot. 75.1 PFF grade when pass rushing, was 22nd overall in the linebacker group. 4 sacks, was tied for 9th, 17 total pressures, tied for 19th, and a 17.3% pass rush win rate, was 9th best among linebackers that had at least 50 or more pass rushes. So you like that. You like those numbers in coverage. He did that 615 times, which was 8th most among linebackers. So certainly did that a lot more than he was pass rushing. 60 overall PFF grade, was 27th in the league, 2 touchdowns surrendered, gave up a 113.5 NFL passer rating, and had 1 penalty. So, you look at the numbers, you look at the grades, and PFF grades are interesting because some people love them, some people hate them. I like to use them just because it gives us a barometer and the idea behind them. And I do know a little bit behind the scenes of what PFF does to grade because I did work for them for a short period of time. Nothing publishing, I wasn't writing or anything like that, but just kind of a behind the scenes guy for a little bit of time. So I'm familiar with some of the stuff they do in the process of grading. And what I like about it is at least there's a consistent basis, right? So if I tell you that this guy's PFF grade was better than this guy's PFF grade, then you may not like the grades overall, but the gap in between and the fact they stack up the way they do, that is something that I like to rely on and kind of look at. So when you look at Bobby Wagner's numbers, right, 19th in total pressures, number 9 in pass rush win rate, 75 grade overall, number 22, number 27 in coverage. So you're looking at a solid linebacker, right? You're looking at a solid veteran linebacker. And I think that's what you see when you turn on the tape, right? So for the games here, I watched week 4 at the New York Giants. I watched week 11 at the Los Angeles Rams, and I watched week 9 at the Baltimore Ravens. And what you see in Bobby Wagner is, I think, a lot of what you would expect: scheme, discipline, trust his play call, not his eyes. So he's a guy that in the film study that I sent to insiders, I even showed you a play against the Baltimore Ravens where he literally hands off one defender who's leaving his zone to another teammate because I trust my teammate to do his job, and then I'm going to stick in my zone, and he ends up in perfect position to defend a receiver that he never even looks at. I'm not even sure he ever even saw him, but he's in the perfect position because he trusts his play call, he trusts the execution of his job, and that's what you expect from a veteran. I think he's mobile enough still to stick around with most NFL running backs, most tight ends. He's smart enough that when they do have a physical advantage over him, he takes good angles and coverage and all that stuff to make sure that he's in a good position to make plays. I still think, maybe the Sam Laportas of the world, the Jahmyr Gibbs, not to overly rave on the Detroit Lions weapons, but, those types of guys are still probably going to give him problems. but I think he still has enough mobility that if he gets matched up in one of those situations, he can definitely hold his own for the most part. Does bite on play action more than I expected to see and more than you would prefer. I don't know if that's always been a thing with Bobby Wagner. Obviously, I haven't covered him his entire career, but I did see it on tape, at least in those 3 games. Bites on play action a little bit more than I think you would like. Scheme dependent and pass rushing is not a guy who's going to win a whole lot on his own. Certainly can win on his own, especially, again, veteran, crafty. If he gets up against a lineman who's a little bit less equipped mentally and strategically, then he is certainly can take advantage of that. We saw one of those reps against the New York Giants, but he's not going to be bowling over guys too many times as a pass rusher. Smart veteran on the field. Expect him to be a coach on the field as well. Leader off the field, solid linebacker on it. I think that's what you're going to get out of Bobby Wagner for at least one season here in Washington. And linebacker Anthony Pittman, another 1-year deal, $1.105 million total, $125,000 guaranteed, $25,000 signing bonus, $1.105 million salary cap. This is a special teams guy. 4 defensive snaps in 2023. So no, I did not go watch the defensive snaps. No, I did not record a film study on Anthony Pittman. Turns 28 in November, 363 special team snaps. I think that's what you expect him to do, right? So you got Bobby Wagner, you got Frankie Luvu, you got Jamin Davis, you got Anthony Pittman. They got some other young linebackers that are going to vie for roster spots. We'll see what happens in the NFL draft. But I think Anthony Pittman, right now, you just look at him as a special teams guy. We'll see if he gets the opportunity and see if he can prove that he's also worthy of some of those defensive snaps for the Washington Commanders. Speaking of guys who might join the linebacker group, let's flip over real quick to the NFL draft. Because I think when you look at the Washington Commanders depth chart for linebackers, those 3 guys, right? Bobby Wagner, Frankie Luvu, Jamin Davis, those are your 3 starting linebackers. Again, depending on how this defense really takes form, I actually have a belief, whatever you want to call it, that most of the time you're only going to see 2, maybe even 1 linebacker actually on the field. I think Frankie Luvu is probably the guy you're going to, I think if I had to predict right now, I'd say Frankie Luvu probably leads the team in snaps in the linebacker position. Bobby Wagner is certainly right there. And then Jamin Davis, again, we'll see how he takes to coaching, see how he takes to the leadership from Bobby and all that stuff. But I think Jamin Davis is not the odd man off the field, but I think his position on the team and his stability on the team certainly is in question at this point. So when you look at the NFL draft, if the Commanders want to add somebody in the first round, you're not going to do it at pick number 2. So you're talking about a trade back, but I don't think you're trading back for a linebacker, right? So I think you're talking about, if you do it, a trade up into the first round, which I don't see as very likely, but Peyton Wilson out of NC State has kind of taken the reins as the number 1 overall linebacker in this year's NFL draft. He's got the length, he's got movement, the IQ is there, the athleticism is there. So, again, if he's a solid guy, probably could come in like day 1 and start. I mean, I think if you have Peyton Wilson in there and he proves himself in training camp, I think Frankie Luvu and Peyton Wilson become your top 2 primary linebackers. And then, like I said, Bobby Wagner plays where he needs to, but is mostly a coach at that point. And Jamin Davis, I don't know, he's kind of on the outside looking in. Day 2 guys, Edgerrin Cooper is a really good one out of Texas A&M. A lot of people had him very high for a long time. He's got a lot of athleticism, also got a lot of length. Certainly could be more of a rush type linebacker. Again, you bring in Frankie Luvu. I don't know if you're necessarily looking at a guy like Edgerrin Cooper. Junior Colson is another one that I like. He's got good size. I think he's a little bit better in coverage, in my opinion, than maybe even Edgerrin is. I really like Junior Colson if he's there in the 3rd round. So obviously still day 2. PFF has him ranked number 66, which is certainly not in the realm of day 3 where the Washington Commanders might be drafting. But if he's there and they were to take him, certainly wouldn't be upset about that. Jeremiah Trotter, again, he's a little bit undersized guy, but he's a guy that we've talked about a lot. If he's not asked to be a consistent pass rusher, I think that you can be successful there with him, looking at him being more of a coverage type of linebacker. Maris Lufau out of Notre Dame wraps up the top 100. And then looking at day 3 option, Cedric Gray out of North Carolina is actually a guy that I target quite often in my mock drafts because I really like what he does. And I think he can do a little bit of everything really well. And with some coaching and time to develop, could become a very solid linebacker. Probably not like a number 1 linebacker on your team ever, but solid. And then Michael Barrett out of Michigan, I think probably is the end of my quote unquote favorites. Doesn't mean there aren't still some others. Steel Chambers out of Ohio State, I think is a little bit underrated. You got some other guys out there who certainly could make a name for themselves in the NFL. Again, you can find impact players and contributors anywhere in the NFL draft. So, we'll see what the Washington Commanders do, but certainly some options there in the off-ball linebacker group. I do expect them to draft one of those at some point in time. If it's me, I'm probably looking 3rd round to go get myself an off-ball linebacker if one is available. Wouldn't even mind maybe reaching a little bit at, pick 100 for a guy like Cedric Gray out of North Carolina. So coming up next, we're going to update The contracts. We got some contracts in. Obviously, we talked about the contracts for all three of these linebackers and see where the Washington Commanders sit and how they got under $50 million in available salary cap. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run, take a nap, read a book, hang out with friends? A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. But the question is, what would that time be used for? If time was unlimited, how would you go about using it? Well, the best way to squeeze the special thing that you don't have enough time for right now into your schedule is to know, first and foremost, that it's important to you, why it's important to you, and how to make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you and also help you do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy or if you need to find a way to get the best out of yourself, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, and from there, you'll get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Wrapping up this episode of Locked On Commanders, talking about the current salary cap situation for the Washington Commanders. Started at, well, it depends on what site you looked at, but like $91 million, $88 million. Made some moves, freed up some cash, did a bunch of things, re-signed some guys. 20 total new contracts at the time of this recording agreed to. And currently, according to Over the Cap, the Washington Commanders are projected to have $49.001 million in salary cap. Now, I told you, as I projected, they would spend about 30 to 40 million. They've certainly eclipsed that number, but I think that they've done it. They've done their spending a much smarter way than what I was doing. I mean, I'd still love to have a Danielle Hunter or a Patrick Queen on this team, but it's hard to look at what the Washington Commanders have done from a contract standpoint and really have too much to not like about it. The estimated true cap space for what I'm looking at, about $40 million. They still have 3 contracts left. I don't see any of them going over like $3 million a year. Probably all 1-year deals, to be quite honest with you. But I think, $3 million cap hit is probably about the ceiling on the ceiling on average, excuse me. So you're looking at about $40 million in estimated actual cap space. And then after about $10 million dedicated to the NFL draft class, you're looking at about $30 million. But the thing about that you have to like is that with 16 of the 20, or is it 17? I think it's 17 of the 20 contracts, maybe the 16. I don't know. With 16 or 17 of the 20 contracts that we have data for, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. So really close to half of the contracts that the Commanders have agreed to are 1-year deals. And when you total up those numbers, I mean, 2.4 million, 3.6 million there. So that's 6 million total. Another 9.75, 10 million, call it 10, 10.25, 13, 14 million, 16 million. So 20.5, 21 million total, 22. So you got about $25 million in cap space this year tied up in 1-year deals. And then even some of these other deals, you got a 2-year deal with Austin Eckler. That's worth a total of $8.43 million. 3.23 of the cap hit is this year. So if you need to, for whatever reason, get out of that next year, you certainly can. Even some of these other deals with guys like Nick Allegretti, 3 years, 16 million, 3.58 of it is this year. It would be a tough pill to swallow, but if you need to, you can get out of that as well. Like the way they're stacking these contracts, every day, as you remember this, we talked about this earlier in the season, where I really kind of looked at this year. This year is kind of the gauge everything year, right? You have a whole lot of players that you're inheriting that you don't really know. You kind of know, you watched them on tape. Go out there, confirm throughout the season what you assumed, get new lessons, learn who these guys are, bring in guys that you think are going to fit, see if they actually fit or not, bring in some draft picks that you think are going to fit, start working on that. And next year, you're still going to have a very solid pool of money to pull from. And in fact, despite all the spending, literally spending like $50 million nearly, I think it's right around $50 million in salary cap space this year. If you look at the Washington Commanders 2025 number, according to Over the Cap, they're due to have $99 million available in salary cap space. Now, again, some of that is going to go away because of the NFL draft class about to come in. Those guys are going to be on guaranteed deals and all that stuff. So really, you're probably looking at about $90 million or so in 2025 cap space. But to see a team like the Washington Commanders spend as much money as they have this offseason, And then also look ahead and say you're going to have nearly $100 million in cap space again, this time next year. And this time next year, you're going to be armed with a year of experience with all of these players. Know who you want to keep, know who you don't want to keep. I mean, it's amazing. And I mean, you look at some of the cap savings that you can get here if you're the Washington Commanders as well. I mean, there are guys that you could free up $17 million on. There's some guys. I mean, there's a guy here that I could see you save about $5 million on, $4 million on another. I mean, there are ways again for this team to very easily go over $100 million in salary cap. And then, of course, is projected based off of next year's cap number. So Washington Commanders are doing a masterful job of building this roster out with potential, and then also making sure they're preserving all of their future capital, cash and draft, to make sure that once they have a year under their belt and know who they have and know who they like and know where they want to go with it, they have the resources to attack it head on. So you have to applaud what they're doing. We still have contract information missing for cornerback Noah Igbenogany, cornerback Michael Davis, tackle Cornelius Lucas, and wide receiver Jamison Crowder. So 16 of the 20 contracts are being tracked by Over the Cap right now in detail. So we will update those as soon as we get them here on the show and continuing on and document that the insiders have so they can track everything in real time along with me. So that's going to do it for this episode. Tomorrow, we'll look at another free agent position group. We'll look at the new free agent additions. We'll reset the depth chart. We will look at NFL draft options. Come back for that. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly about becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Every day, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.